In our last video, we talked about at the very end of chapter 11 of Ecclesiastes, we were talking about youth and enjoying your youth. I want to read the last couple of verses in chapter 11 of Ecclesiastes, and then we'll run right into chapter 12 and we'll finish this book up. So verse 9 of chapter 11 says, "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Therefore remove sorrow from your heart, and put away evil from thy flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity." So uh, then chapter 12 just goes right on with that same thought process. And he starts off by saying, "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when you shall say, I have no pleasure in them." So the first thing he says in chapter 12, and again, this whole last chapter is concluding the thoughts that the preachers had through the first 11 chapters. And so the first thing he says, in your youth, remember your Creator while you're still young. Uh, uh, Before evil days come, and 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 before the years draw nigh, and when you say, "I have no pleasure in them," well, no pleasure in what? No pleasure in my days in life, in the years. Uh, I'm sure all of you have known people who, as they grew old, became sick and afflicted, and maybe were bedridden, and maybe they lived that way for months or years even, and they had no pleasure of life. And he's saying, so in chapter 11, he's saying you need to enjoy life as a youth. You need to adventure and do and do all the things that your heart desires, but you need to remember that you will, those things will be brought into judgment someday. So then he goes on in chapter 12 here, verse 1 says, "Remember your Creator in your youth." Remember him before you get old, before the days come when you're not having any pleasure in them. Uh, and then verses 2 through 5, I guess, actually just describes in very poetic terminology uh, the aging process. So we'll read through this and I'll give you some of my opinions on what he's trying to say. Verse 2, "While the sun or the light or the moon or the stars be not darkened, nor the clouds return after the rain." So he says, remember your Creator while you're young, in your youth, before the sun and the moon and the stars all get darker, before your eyes start dimming. Uh, then in verse 3, it says, "In the day when your keepers of the house shall tremble," or when your arms and your legs, the keepers of your house, start to tremble when you as you get weaker. Uh, I don't know how many of you know what power to weight ratio means, but in cars, a lot of times, a really light car with a really powerful engine has uh, a strong power to weight ratio. Uh, as I've grown older, my power to weight ratio has reversed. Used to have powerful legs and not much weight. Now I've got a whole lot of weight and not much power. So my power to weight ratio changes as you grow older. The strong man shall bow themselves. The back starts getting weaker, even strong people. And their grinders cease because they are few. Uh, there was a time when I and the wife would sit down to eat, and I would finish my food and half of hers while she was still eating her half a plate full. And now everyone at the table's finished before me because there's fewer grinders in my head than there once was, and it's a little hard to hit that food every time. So you got to take more strokes at it. You got to chew. It takes longer to eat because you have fewer teeth. So he says, "Strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders shall cease because there are few. And those that look out of the windows will be darkened. Your eyes get dimmer and dimmer." Uh, Especially, I would imagine, when this was written, few people would have had spectacles. Verse 4, "And the doors shall be shut in the streets when the sound of the grinding is low, and you shall rise up in the voice of the bird, and the daughters and the music shall be brought low. Uh, I, I can't understand music. Used to, I could understand rock and roll lyrics, and now I can't understand someone just talking to me. Uh, uh, then in verse 5, he says, also, when they shall be afraid of that which is high, and fear shall be in the way. Uh, as you grow older, you don't like being in high places because your power to weight ratio has changed. Your arms and your legs are trembling, and high places are a little more scary. You don't want to be on a ladder as much, that sort of thing. So he's just describing growing older. Let's see. Fear shall be in the way, again, verse 5, and the almond tree shall flourish. Uh, I think he's referring to growing gray. Uh, when an almond tree is flourishing or in blooming, it's all white, covered in white. It's sort of like what little bit of hair I've got left, all covered in white. The grasshopper shall be a burden, so it's something that's not even powerful is a burden to you. Uh, and desire shall fail, because man goeth to his long home, and the mourners go about the street. So as you grow older, your desires diminish, whether that be sensual desires or whether that just be desires that I want to go see this or I want to go do that. You just don't really desire to do anything as you grow older. So these these 6 verses, excuse me, these 5 verses, 2 through 5 rather, are just describing how it's going to be as you grow older. And that verse 1 says you should remember your Creator while you're young, and these things haven't started happening to you yet. Then in verse 6, he says, or ever the silver cord be loosed, or the golden bowl be broken, or the pitcher be broken at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. Now, I'm not even going to attempt to uh, explain uh, what he's referring to, but I have read, and they may be right here. The first one, or the silver cord be loose, your spinal cord come loose. I think he's talking about vital organs breaking down in you, because the next thing he says, then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. So he says, verse 1, remember your Creator while you're young, because the days are coming when your teeth's going to fall out, you're not going to be able to see, your legs are going to be weaker, your back's going to be stooped over, and eventually your internal organs will begin to break down, and then this body will return to dust, and the spirit will leave it and return to its Creator. Uh, uh, if you recollect Genesis 2:7, it says, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So God formed man out of dust, and then he breathed the breath of life into man. And we live our life, but at some point, this flesh returns to the dust, and the spirit returns to its creator. Now we'll read in the last verse what happens then. So just hold on to this thought. Man returns to dust. From dust you came, and dust you'll return, and your spirit returns to its creator, to its giver, to God, uh, who gave it. Let me turn a page here. So we're in verse 8. He just said, he took you from youth to being old and aged and dying. And then he blurts out his theme. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. He's took you from your youth to being an old person and dying and fading away. And he says, it's all vanity. It's all useless. All life, all of this is useless and vanity. And moreover, he says in verse 9, and moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people. He still taught the people knowledge. Yea, he gave good heed and sought out to set in order many proverbs. So he cries out in verse 8, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, but because the preacher's wise, he still taught the people, even though this life is vanity and so much of its uselessness. The preacher was wise, and because he was wise, he taught the people knowledge. Yea, he gave good heed, or he gave good advice. He gave good insights on things to avoid, and sought out and set in order many proverbs. Okay, so the preacher says it's all vanity, but because the preacher was wise, he gives heed and gives many instructions and writes many proverbs. And in verse 11, he says, oh, excuse me, verse 10, it says, the preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written was upright, even the words of faith. So it says, the preacher sought out to find acceptable words, and that which was written was upright. So he sought out the right things to say. Then he wrote them out in Proverbs, wrote them out in Ecclesiastes for us to read. They were even, it says, they were words of truth. So all this that we have read in Ecclesiastes are words of truth. These are words. So many people say, "Well, Solomon just lived his life and he's drifted away from God," and I believe he did that. He married all those women and he did a lot of bad things, but still, he was seeking out wisdom and relaying truths to the people. Uh, uh, then he says, "The words of the wise." Remember, the preacher's the wise, and he has sought out acceptable words to give us to heed his warnings. And he says in verse 11, the words of the wise are as goads and as nails fastened by the masters of assemblies, which are given for one shepherd. Excuse me, from one shepherd. So they're given from one shepherd, that'd be Christ. But these are wise words are as goads. Now, for some of you who aren't country boys and girls, a goad would be a sharp stick that you use to prod farm animals into their stables or to wherever you need to control them to grow, to control the herds. They're prods to guide and direct with. And so the wise words that the preacher has written are goads. Uh, verse 12, and further, by these, my son, by these words, by these goads, these words that are used as goads to prod us to what we need to do, and further, my son, and further by these, my son, be admonished by these words of wisdom. Of making many books, there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The preacher says, you can write books from now on. We can write books and books and books and books. And all you've got to do is go down to your local bookstore and you can see that of writing books, there is no end. No end. You can look at on YouTube videos and you will see that there is no end to people making videos of things like this, right? There's no end to all that, he says. And it becomes weary, he says. But then in verse 13, he says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. You can write books. You can write books till there's no ink left and there's no paper left. And in the end, the conclusion of the whole matter is that we should fear God and we should keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. It's your purpose. It is why you were created. It is the entire duty of man to fear God, to respect, reverence God, and to keep his commandments. Verse 14. For God shall bring every work into judgment, and every secret thing, whether they be good or whether they be evil. So if we go back to verse 7, where it says, it's going to come a time when the body returns to dust and the spirit returns to God who gave it, returns to its creator, right? Now, when that spirit returns to its creator, it will be judged. God shall bring every work into judgment, along with every secret thought, every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. This spirit will stand before God in judgment. And then it will be assigned its eternal home. Therefore, while you're still young, and you're younger today than you will ever be again, seek God and his righteousness. Hope to see you soon.